I'm Miles Reynolds, 32 years old, and still reeling from the aftermath of my father's death 3 years ago. What I never expected was for my sister Rachel to steal my rightful inheritance while my mother not only defended her actions, but threatened to cut me off completely. Now, in some twisted reality, Mom wants to send me a grown adult with a career to a military-style rehabilitation program because I refuse to let Rachel get away with theft. The evidence is crystal clear, but blood apparently runs thicker than truth in my family. Hey, before I dive into this nightmare, where are you watching from? If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe to let me know I'm not alone in this madness. Growing up in our middle-class Portland suburb, I never imagined my family would become the battlefield it is today. Our neighborhood was the kind where kids rode bikes until streetlights came on and parents hosted backyard barbecues on weekends. My sister Rachel is 4 years younger than me, and back then, we were actually close. She was the sociable one, with the contagious laugh, who could charm anyone, while I was the quiet, tech-obsessed kid who preferred taking apart computers to playing sports. My father Howard built his construction business from nothing. He started with just a truck and some tools, eventually growing Reynolds Construction into one of the most respected firms in the Pacific Northwest. Dad was a man of integrity. Handshakes meant something to him, and his word was as solid as the foundations he built. He worked long hours, often coming home with sawdust in his hair and concrete on his boots, but he always made time for us. Mom Diana was a homemaker who ran our household with precision and warmth, though looking back, the signs of her favoritism toward Rachel were always there. When I brought home straight A's, she'd nod approvingly, before quickly shifting attention to Rachel's school play or dance recital. When Rachel brought home C's, there was always a celebration for her trying her best. I didn't recognize this pattern until much later. Hindsight really is 2020. Dad must have noticed this imbalance because he made special efforts with me. Every Saturday morning, we'd have what he called men's breakfast, just the two of us at a local diner, where he'd ask about my latest computer projects while drawing diagrams on napkins of buildings he was working on. Those mornings became sacred to me. "You've got a mind for systems, Miles," he told me once, while I was helping him organize a chaotic project schedule into a digital format. "Rachel's got her mother's charm, but you've got something special up here." He tapped his temple. "That's why I want you to take over the tech side of the business one day." As a teenager, I developed a custom software program that revolutionized how Dad's company tracked projects' inventory and client communications. What started as a high school computer club project grew into the technological backbone of Reynolds Construction. Dad was so proud, he created a new technology division within the company, promising it would be mine to run one day. "You've added millions in value to this company," he told me on my 25th birthday. "When the time comes, the tech division is yours. You built it. You should own it." Meanwhile, Rachel majored in business administration, partied through college, and only joined the company after graduation because Dad offered her a management position. She had the people skills. I lacked charming clients and smoothing over conflicts, but she never truly understood the business's inner workings. By the time I turned 30, I was working for a prestigious software firm, developing enterprise solutions while maintaining my role as technology consultant for Dad's business. I had my own apartment in a renovated industrial building downtown Exposed. Brick walls lined with bookshelves, my collection of vintage computer parts displayed like art, and a comfortable leather chair where I'd spend evenings coding or reading. My girlfriend Haley was the unexpected balance in my structured life. We met when she spilled coffee on my laptop at a cafe 2 years ago. While I panicked about lost data, she calmly produced a bag of rice from her purse. "She kept it for emergencies," she said with a straight face. I fell for her practical optimism instantly. As a kindergarten teacher, she brought warmth and spontaneity into my analytical world. Life seemed good. I was saving for an engagement ring, had a career I enjoyed, and maintained what I thought was a cordial relationship with my family, despite the undercurrents of tension. Sunday dinners at Mom's house were sometimes awkward but generally peaceful. Dad played mediator when necessary, always ensuring conversations stayed civil. Family is everything, Miles' dad would remind me whenever Mom and I butted heads. Sometimes that means biting your tongue and choosing your battles. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become, or that the real battles would begin after he was gone. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was in a meeting when my phone vibrated repeatedly in my pocket. Stepping out, I saw 6 missed calls from Mom and Rachel. My father had collapsed at a construction site. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. A massive heart attack that came without warning at 55. The funeral was a blur of dark suits, sympathetic murmurs, and the surreal feeling that this couldn't possibly be real. Dad had been the picture of health. The man hiked mountains on weekends and had the energy of someone 20 years younger. Rachel sobbed openly, clinging to Mom as they received condolences. I stood slightly apart, shaking hands mechanically, unable to process that my father would never again meet me for Saturday breakfast or call with a technical question that was really just an excuse to chat. 2 weeks later, we gathered in the wood-paneled office of Harold Bennett, the family lawyer who'd handled Reynolds' affairs for decades. Bennett was a contemporary of my father's. They'd played college football together, and his solemn expression, as he adjusted his reading glasses, told me this meeting wouldn't be straightforward. Howard was very specific about his wishes. Bennett began pulling out the will. The construction division of Reynolds Enterprises will pass to Rachel, while the technology division, including all related intellectual property client contracts and systems, will go to Miles. Mom's lips tightened into a thin line. Rachel nodded, seemingly accepting this division as fair, though I caught an exchange of glances between her and her boyfriend Dominic that struck me as odd. Dominic had only been in the picture for about 8 months. Yet suddenly, he was attending family meetings and offering opinions on business matters. Additionally, Bennett continued. Howard specified that the family home remains with Diana with equal financial distributions to both children from his personal accounts and investments. On paper, it seemed fair. The construction division was the original business, but the technology division I'd built had become equally valuable, if not more so. We left Bennett's office with copies of the documents, and I believed we were all on the same page. Within 3 months, small discrepancies began appearing in the company financial reports. Walter Freeman, Dad's longtime business partner, who ran operations, pulled me aside after a meeting. "Something's not right, Miles," he said, voice low. "Rachel and that boyfriend of hers have been asking strange questions about the tech contracts, details about termination clauses, transfer of ownership provisions, things they shouldn't be concerned with." I hired an independent accountant to review the books. She found several small but concerning irregularities, consulting fees to companies that didn't exist, resources being redirected from the technology division to general operations without proper documentation. When I brought this up to Mom over dinner, she waved her hand dismissively. "You always were obsessive about details, Miles. Rachel is adjusting to her new role. There's bound to be some reorganization." Reorganization is one thing I countered. Unexplained financial transfers are another. "Your sister knows what she's doing," Mom snapped. "Not everything needs to be analyzed to death." Rachel became increasingly hard to reach, canceling our weekly business reviews and sending her assistant to meetings in her place. When I did manage to corner her in her office, her answers were vague and defensive. "The business needs to adapt, Miles. Dad's way of doing things isn't always the most efficient." "Dad's way of doing things built this company," I reminded her. "And now it's my job to take it forward," she shot back. "If you can't be supportive, at least don't get in the way." While clearing out some of Dad's personal items from his home office, I discovered a journal hidden in his desk drawer. In it, he'd documented concerns about Dominic, noting his sudden interest in company finances and what Dad called his questionable business background. Dad had apparently been planning to talk to Rachel about her boyfriend before his death. A week later, I received an email announcement. Reynolds Construction announces strategic restructuring. The carefully worded corporate speak couldn't hide what was happening. Rachel was consolidating power and positioning the technology division as merely a supporting department rather than a separate entity. I confronted her that evening, at her condo, an upscale place she'd recently purchased that seemed well beyond what her salary should afford. "What exactly are you doing?" I demanded. "Running the company," she replied coolly. "Something you'd understand if you were actually there full-time instead of playing with computers at your day job." That day job pays me because the technology I developed has value that belongs to me, according to Dad's will. The will divided a company that needs to function as a whole, she said. I'm doing what's necessary. When I mentioned finding Dad's journal and his concerns about Dominic, Rachel's face flushed with anger. Stay out of my personal life. Dad never understood what I needed. He was always too busy being impressed with your precious coding. She stormed out, and when I called Mom afterward, her response chilled me. Why must you always antagonize your sister? She sighed. Rachel is under enormous pressure taking over the business. If you were half as supportive as your father would have wanted, you'd be helping her, not questioning her decisions. I hung up with a growing sense of dread. The subtle favoritism I'd experienced throughout childhood was transforming into something far more damaging, and it was about to cost me my inheritance. The certified letter arrived 6 months after Dad's death. Its legal language was dense, but the message was clear. The technology division was being reorganized and absorbed into the main company structure, effective immediately. All assets, intellectual property, and client relationships would be consolidated under Rachel's direct management. I immediately called Bennett, who sounded uncomfortable on the phone. I'd rather discuss this in person, Miles. His downtown office felt colder than I remembered as he spread documents across his mahogany desk. I tried to advise against this approach, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. But as the CEO, Rachel has certain authorities. Not the authority to override our father's will, I countered. Bennett sighed. That's where things get complicated. These documents he pushed forward, a set of transfer authorizations, appear to have your signature. I leaned forward, stunned. The signatures looked convincingly like mine, but I had never seen these papers before. These are forgeries. I feared as much, Bennett said quietly. There's more. Financial audits show systematic transfer of assets from the technology division over the past several months. The intellectual property has been reassigned to a new LLC that appears to be controlled by Rachel and Dominic jointly. And Mom, does she know about this? Bennett's hesitation told me everything. Diana has countersigned many of these documents as a family trustee. My head spun. Not just Rachel, but my own mother had participated in essentially stealing my inheritance. The betrayal cut deep. This wasn't just about money or business assets, but about erasing my contribution, my years of work, and my father's explicit wishes. That evening, I drove to my mother's house, my car filled with evidence collected from Bennett and the accountant. Rachel's Range Rover was in the driveway beside Dominic's sleek Mercedes. Perfect. Everyone in one place. The three of them were sitting in the living room, wine glasses in hand, looking for all the world like they were celebrating. They fell silent when I entered. Miles' mom started, her tone cautionary. We weren't expecting you. I dropped the stack of documents on the coffee table. Clearly not. You probably thought I wouldn't discover the fraud until it was too late. Rachel at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, while Dominic simply leaned back with an almost amused expression. Fraud is a very serious accusation, Mom said stiffly. So is forgery, I replied. And embezzlement. And violating a legal will. Rachel suddenly stood. Oh, for God's sake, Miles. Yes, we've restructured things. The company needs to operate as a unified entity to survive. The technology division is only valuable as part of the whole. That's not your decision to make. Dad left it to me. Dad didn't understand modern business, she snapped. He was sentimental, giving you an equal share, when I'm the one with the business degree, the one who's there every day. You needed the money more, I asked incredulously. Is that your justification? Yes, she shouted, surprising even herself with her honesty. Yes, I need it more. You have your fancy tech job and your simple life. Dominic and I have plans, investments, properties. We're building something. With my stolen property, I said flatly. Mom stood, then moving to Rachel's side. Miles, you've always had it easier. Everything came naturally to you while Rachel had to work for every achievement. Your father indulged your interests, but Rachel is the one truly committed to the family legacy. I stared at her, unable to recognize the woman who'd raised me. So, you helped her forge documents, steal what Dad explicitly left to me. I did what was necessary for this family's future, she said, chin raised defensively. Tell him the rest. Diana Dominic spoke up his tone, suggesting he was enjoying the drama. Mom glared at him before turning back to me. The technology assets were becoming siloed. You were creating a separate kingdom instead of supporting your sister's leadership. We needed to integrate everything. By we, you mean you and the boyfriend Dad didn't trust. I was nearly shouting now. The man Dad was investigating before he died. Rachel gasped. What are you talking about? Dad kept notes. He was concerned about Dominic's sudden interest in company finances. He was planning to talk to you about it before he died. Dominic's smirk faltered slightly, but Rachel shook her head vehemently. More lies. Dad loved Dominic. He told me so. Your father was old-fashioned. Mom interjected. He wouldn't have understood modern business partnerships. I laughed bitterly. Is that what we're calling fraud now? A modern business partnership? That's enough, Mom said sharply. Miles, you have a choice to make. You can accept the new company structure and continue as part of this family, or you can pursue this misguided crusade and find yourself very alone. You're asking me to choose between my birthright and my family. I'm asking you to recognize reality, she replied coldly. Rachel is in charge now. The sooner you accept that, the better for everyone. Rachel stepped forward suddenly, tearful the same performance she'd used since childhood when things didn't go her way. Miles, please. I need your support, not your opposition. We're all grieving, Dad. Don't make this harder. I watched in disbelief as Mom immediately softened, putting her arm around Rachel protectively while fixing me with an accusatory glare, as if I were the villain for exposing their scheme. I can't believe you both, I said, gathering my documents. Dad would be ashamed. Don't you dare presume to know what your father would think, Mom called after me as I headed for the door. Howard understood sacrifice for family. Something you clearly don't. I drove straight to Trevor's apartment, my hands shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. Trevor had been my best friend since college, the brother I'd never had, and the only person besides Haley who truly understood my family dynamics. They actually forged your signature, he asked, pouring me a whiskey after I explained everything. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. My own mother, Trev. She helped Rachel steal from me, and then gave me an ultimatum when I confronted them. Trevor shook his head. Your mom has always enabled Rachel, but this is next level. What are you going to do? Fight back, I said, the whiskey burning my throat. Dad wanted me to have the tech division. I'm not letting them erase his wishes or my work. The next morning I discovered my access to company accounts had been restricted. My email returned an account deactivated message, and my keycard was denied at the office building. When I called Walter, he sounded apologetic. Rachel held an emergency board meeting last night. She presented documents showing you had agreed to a buyout, said you wanted to focus on your other job. That's completely fabricated, I told him. I figured as much, he sighed. Miles, be careful. There's something not right about this whole situation. Later that day, a colleague forwarded me an email announcement from Rachel to all staff, thanking me for my years of service and announcing my decision to pursue other opportunities. The systematic erasure of my role was happening in real time. That evening, scrolling through social media to distract myself, I froze at a photo Rachel had posted. In the background of a selfie taken in her new house, I could clearly see Dad's vintage record collection and the antique desk clock he'd inherited from his father, items of sentimental value that had disappeared from his being. Office. According to the will, personal effects were to be divided equally, but Rachel had apparently helped herself to whatever she wanted. As I stared at the image, the magnitude of the betrayal finally hit me fully. This wasn't just about business assets. My sister and mother were systematically erasing my place in the family, rewriting the narrative to exclude me. The realization left me hollow, staring at my phone in the dark of my apartment, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. With Bennett's guidance, I began consulting with Jackson Morris, an attorney specializing in estate litigation. His office was smaller than Bennett's, but his reputation for tenacity was unmatched. Forgery, fraudulent, transfers, violation of fiduciary duty. Morris listed, reviewing my documents. There's a solid case here, Miles, but I should warn you, family business litigation gets ugly fast. He wasn't wrong. Within days of our first meeting, the text messages and calls started. Mom left voicemails alternating between guilt trips and outright threats. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. By threatening legal action against your own sister. Then you're breaking this family apart, just like your father always feared you would. Rachel's approach was more direct. Back off, Miles. You'll regret making enemies of us. The situation escalated when my aunt called concerned about my mental health crisis. Apparently, Rachel had been telling family members I was having some sort of breakdown triggered by grief, that my accusations were paranoid delusions stemming from inability to cope with Dad's death. She's worried about you, my aunt said. We all are. Maybe you should talk to someone professional. I later learned Rachel had systematically contacted nearly everyone in our extended family, with variations of the same story. Miles is unstable, Miles is vindictive, Miles is trying to destroy the company out of jealousy. The character assassination was thorough and effective. Lifelong family friends began avoiding me, and relatives who'd always been warm suddenly became distant. 3 weeks after I retained Morris, Mom showed up unannounced at my apartment. Her expression was grimly determined as she stepped inside, without waiting for an invitation. This has gone far enough, she announced, setting her purse down firmly on my counter. I've been patient, hoping you'd come to your senses, but clearly, more direct intervention is needed. Intervention, I repeated. That's an interesting way to describe confronting theft and forgery. She waved her hand dismissively. Your perspective is skewed, Miles. Always has been. You see the world in black and white just like your father. Is that supposed to be an insult? Dad saw clearly enough to specify who should inherit what? Your father didn't anticipate how difficult the transition would be, she countered. Rachel needs consolidated control to move the company forward. So she should have negotiated, not stolen. Mom's expression hardened. I didn't come here to debate. I came to offer you an alternative to this destructive path you're on. She pulled a brochure from her purse and placed it on the coffee table. Ridgeline Recovery and Rehabilitation Center. It's a specialized program for troubled adults who need structure and discipline. I stared at the brochure in disbelief. It described what was essentially a military-style boot camp disguised as a wellness retreat. You can't be serious. 3 months, she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. They have an excellent success rate with adults experiencing adjustment difficulties and obsessive behavior patterns. Mom, I'm 32 years old with a successful career. I'm not going to some boot camp because I caught Rachel stealing from me. Your perspective is distorted, she insisted. This program will help reset your thinking, teach you to be a team player instead of fighting your family at every turn. This is absurd, I said, standing up. I think you should leave. Her next words stopped me cold. If you don't agree to the program, I'll have no choice but to inform your employer about your increasingly erratic behavior. I understand they're quite strict about mental stability given the sensitive nature of your work. The threat was clear. She would sabotage my career if I didn't comply with her demands. The calculation in her eyes was something I'd never seen before, or perhaps never allowed myself to see. Why are you doing this? I asked quietly. What did I ever do to make you dislike me so much? Something flickered across her face, pain perhaps, or guilt before her expression hardened again. You remind me too much of him, she said finally. The same stubborn righteousness, the same inability to bend. Howard always thought he knew best, just like you do. Dad built that company from nothing, I reminded her. He earned the right to decide its future. And I stood beside him for 30 years. She snapped, emotion finally breaking through. 30 years of being second to his precious business of raising his children, while he worked endless hours. Rachel understands what that was like for me. She's always understood. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about the inheritance or the business. This was decades of resentment, playing out with me as the proxy for my father. So this is punishment, I said. Punishment for being his son. This is correction, she replied coldly. A chance for you to learn what Howard never did. That family harmony sometimes requires sacrifice. After she left, I sat staring at the Ridgeline brochure, trying to process the surreal conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Walter. Need to talk. Not on phone. Coffee tomorrow. Walter met me at an out-of-the-way cafe the next morning, looking nervously over his shoulder as he sat down. They're planning to sell off the technology division, he said without preamble. Dominic has a buyer lined up, some competitor, who wants the client list and software architecture. They can't legally sell what they don't own, I said. They've created a paper trail suggesting you approved the transfer months ago. He slid a folder across the table. Copies of everything I could access. Bank transfers, board minutes, emails. Rachel doesn't know I still have access to the executive archive. The evidence was damning: systematic looting of the technology division, with assets being transferred to shell companies controlled by Dominic, meeting minutes, with fabricated approvals from me, and worst of all, emails between Rachel and Mom, discussing how to handle the Miles situation. That evening, I returned home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Inside, the place had been ransacked, drawers, emptied, electronics missing, and most importantly, my father's journal and several key documents gone. The police officer who responded seemed skeptical when I suggested it was related to the inheritance dispute. Most burglars go for electronics and cash, he noted, writing in his notepad. You're saying they took paperwork. And a journal. My father's journal. Any chance a family member has a key? He asked. I thought of the spare key I'd given Dad years ago, which would have been among his personal effects that Rachel had apparently claimed. My suspicions about Dominic's involvement strengthened the next day when Trevor spotted him having lunch with a man. Trevor recognized from the local real estate circuit a fixer known for helping wealthy clients navigate legal gray areas. Mom's ultimatum came via certified letter: drop all claims against Rachel and the company by the end of the month, or face a countersuit for defamation and business interference that would expose every questionable decision you've ever made. The letter concluded with a renewed demand that I enter the Ridgeline program as a show of good faith and commitment to family healing. The pressure was becoming unbearable. Former colleagues stopped returning my calls. Family friends crossed the street to avoid me. My cousin's wedding invitation was rescinded because the family situation might create tension. I was being systematically isolated. Only Haley stood firmly by my side, even when Rachel reached out to her directly. She called me at school. Haley told me, outraged. Told me I should encourage you to accept help because you were becoming dangerously fixated on conspiracy theories. Asked if you'd been sleeping normally or showing signs of paranoia. The gaslighting was so persistent, I began questioning my own perceptions. Was I overreacting? Was grief clouding my judgment? I started seeing Dr. Amelia Parker, a therapist specializing in family trauma, seeking objective perspective. What you're describing is a classic pattern of narcissistic family dynamics, Dr. Parker said during our third session. The golden child, the scapegoat, the enabling parent. Your sister has been positioned as infallible while you're expected to sacrifice your needs for family harmony, which really means maintaining the status quo of favoritism. Her validation helped anchor me as the situation continued to deteriorate. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was being systematically manipulated by the people who should have been most trustworthy. Standing your ground isn't selfish, Dr. Parker assured me. It's self-preservation. And sometimes, it's the only way to break unhealthy patterns. With her words echoing in my mind, I decided to stop retreating and start fighting back properly. The inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about my father's wishes, my years of work, and most importantly, refusing to be erased from my own family narrative. The company-wide email arrived with impeccable timing just as I was preparing documentation for a formal lawsuit. Reynolds Enterprises celebrates engagement of CEO Rachel Reynolds to Chief Strategy Officer Dominic Carver. Attached was a professional photograph of Rachel beaming, her left hand prominently displayed to showcase an enormous diamond ring. A ring I recognized immediately, as my grandmother's, a family heirloom Dad had specifically mentioned I should receive for my future wife in a letter accompanying his will. The engagement announcement included details of a celebration at the company headquarters that Friday. Despite every instinct telling me to stay away, I knew I needed to see firsthand what was happening at the company I partially owned. I arrived to find the office transformed: champagne flowing, catered food, and a large banner congratulating the happy couple. Former colleagues greeted me with awkward smiles, or avoided eye contact entirely. Rachel held court near the center of the room, Dominic's arm possessively around her waist. When she spotted me, her smile faltered only momentarily, before she glided over, pulling Dominic along. "Miles, I wasn't sure you'd come." Her voice carried just loud enough for nearby employees to hear. "It means so much that you're supporting us despite everything." Before I could respond, she turned to the gathering crowd. "My brother has been going through a difficult time since Dad died. Today's appearance is a wonderful sign of progress." The condescension was expertly crafted, positioning herself as the concerned sister, while subtly reinforcing the narrative that I was unstable. Several employees nodded sympathetically, giving me pitying looks. "Congratulations," I managed, nodding toward the ring. "Grandmother would be surprised to see her ring used this way." Rachel's smile tightened. "Mom thought it was appropriate for the family business to continue through me. Traditions evolve, Miles." Dominic extended his hand. "No hard feelings, right? Family businesses always have their rough patches during transitions." I ignored his hand. "I understand congratulations are in order for more than an engagement. The Westlake contract must have brought in quite a bonus." It was a shot in the dark based on information from Walter, but Dominic's momentary freeze told me I'd hit a nerve. The Westlake development was a major client Dad had secured before his death, a client whose substantial deposit appeared to have been diverted. "Business matters probably aren't appropriate for a celebration," Rachel interjected smoothly, "especially given your distance from day-to-day operations." As I left the event early, I overheard two employees whispering, "That's the brother. Mental health issues, apparently." Such a shame. The character assassination was complete. I was now the unstable outsider, while Rachel and Dominic were the beloved leadership carrying the company forward. 2 weeks later, Mom called with news that felt like a physical blow. "Rachel is pregnant. We're announcing it at Thanksgiving dinner, but I thought you should know beforehand." "Is that supposed to change something?" I asked. "It changes everything, Miles. This is the next generation of our family. Your father's grandchild. Rachel is continuing the Reynolds legacy." The implication was clear. Rachel's child reinforced her position as the true heir to the family business, while I remained on the outside. "And I suppose this means I'm uninvited from Thanksgiving?" I asked. Her hesitation was answer enough. "We think it's best to keep things calm for Rachel's health." Being excluded from a family holiday hurt more than I wanted to admit, even after everything that had happened. That night I sat alone in my apartment, staring at old family photos, and wondering how we'd reached this point. The next morning, Walter called. "They're liquidating the software patents," he said, without greeting. "Dominic has a buyer lined up through some connection in Seattle. The paperwork shows your approval, of course. Do you have copies?" "Better. I have the original documents from before they were altered, and I've secured a backup of the entire company's server from before they started changing things. The metadata will show when modifications were made, and by whom." This evidence was the turning point, proof not just of forgery, but of a systematic effort to defraud. Morris was cautiously optimistic when I showed him the files. "This substantially strengthens our case," he confirmed. "The electronic trail is damning." As I dug deeper with Walter's help, I discovered Dominic's concerning history. Previous involvement with failed businesses, allegations of financial impropriety that never quite resulted in charges, and a pattern of insinuating himself into family-owned companies undergoing leadership transitions. Armed with this information, I was preparing my next move when Rachel dramatically escalated the situation. She showed up at my workplace, unannounced, visibly pregnant and tearful, creating a scene in the reception area. "Please, Miles," she sobbed loudly, as my colleagues watched uncomfortably. "Mom is devastated by what you're doing to our family. Think about the baby, your niece or nephew." Security escorted her out, but the damage was done. My manager called me into his office that afternoon, expression grave. "Miles, we value your contributions, but we can't have personal drama disrupting the workplace." Though he didn't formally discipline me, The warning was clear: my job could be at risk if the situation continued. Rachel had strategically targeted my professional stability, the one area of my life still untouched by the family chaos. That evening, Haley received the first threatening call. "You should reconsider your relationship choices," a muffled voice advised before hanging up. Though we couldn't prove Rachel or Dominic was responsible, the timing was suspicious. The stress began affecting my health: insomnia, weight loss, constant tension, headaches. Dr. Parker expressed concern during our sessions about the physical toll the situation was taking. "Family estrangement is deeply traumatic," she acknowledged. "But sometimes it's necessary for survival." Mom's next move was announcing changes to her own will, explicitly excluding me while naming Rachel's unborn child as the primary beneficiary of her estate. Though I cared little about the financial aspect, the symbolic rejection cut deep. The final blow came when I learned Rachel had begun selling off family heirlooms, items meant to be shared between us. My father's collection of rare first edition novels, his restored vintage motorcycle, even childhood mementos, like the model train set we had built together, all sold or given away without consultation. When confronted by text, Rachel was unapologetic. "They're family property, and I'm the only one acting like family right now." The breaking point came during an accidental encounter at Dad's favorite diner, the place where he and I had shared our Saturday breakfasts. I was sitting at our usual booth when Rachel and Dominic walked in. They hadn't noticed me yet, and I overheard Dominic laughing about the technology fire sale and your brother's precious software going to the highest bidder. Rachel spotted me then, and rather than appearing embarrassed, she approached my table with confident smugness. "Miles, what a coincidence." "Is it?" I asked. "This was Dad's and my place. You never came here." "Things changed," she shrugged. "I'm embracing Dad's traditions now that I'm carrying the next generation." Something in me snapped. "This isn't about Dad's traditions or the next generation. This is a systematic theft, and you know it." She leaned closer, dropping the public persona entirely. "What are you going to do about it, Sue, your pregnant sister? Further alienate yourself from the family? Face it, Miles, you've lost. Nobody believes you anymore. Even if they did, they wouldn't side with you against me." "Why?" I asked, genuinely needing to understand. "We used to be close. What happened to you?" For a moment, something like regret flickered across her face. Then Dominic stepped up behind her hand possessively on her shoulder, and her expression hardened. "I got smart," she said simply. "Dad always favored you, the brilliant son who could do no wrong. It's my turn now." As they walked away, I sat frozen, her words echoing in my mind. The narrative I'd believed my whole life, that Mom favored Rachel while Dad tried to balance things, had been completely inverted in her mind. She genuinely believed she was simply claiming what she deserved after years of playing second fiddle. That night, Mom called with her final ultimatum: either I enter the Ridgeline program the following week and drop all legal claims, or she would permanently disown me. "This family crisis ends now one way or another," she declared. Sitting alone in my apartment after the call, surrounded by the few family photos I still displayed, I reached a moment of painful clarity. I had been fighting not just for my inheritance, but for a family that in many ways existed only in my mind. The mother who saw me clearly, the sister who valued our relationship, these were idealizations I had clung to, despite years of evidence to the contrary. Dr. Parker had asked a question in our last session that now resonated powerfully. What would self-respect look like in this situation? The answer was suddenly painfully clear. Self-respect meant stopping the desperate chase for approval from people who had shown they were willing to betray me. It meant standing up for my father's wishes and my own worth, even if that path led away from the family I had always known. With this realization came an overwhelming sense of grief, not just for the inheritance being stolen, but for the family relationships I had to finally acknowledge were irreparably broken. The morning after Mom's ultimatum, I met with Morris and laid out a new approach. No more measured responses, no more hoping for reconciliation. We go all in. He nodded, understanding the shift. "We have enough for a comprehensive lawsuit. Fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of assets. But you need to be prepared. This gets very public, very fast. I'm done protecting people who haven't protected me. I told him. We assembled a team of forensic accountants, digital evidence specialists, and Walter providing crucial internal documents. Morris's paralegal created a timeline of every suspicious transaction, every forged document, every misleading communication since Dad's death. The evidence was damning when viewed comprehensively. What had seemed like isolated incidents formed a clear pattern of deliberate fraud. The forged signatures on asset transfers, the backdated board minutes, the systematic draining of technology division resources. The shell companies Dominic had established to receive diverted funds. While the legal team built our case, I met with key business associates who had witnessed Rachel's behavior firsthand. Several agreed to provide affidavits describing concerning interactions. Clients who'd been misled, vendors who'd witnessed questionable practices, employees who'd been instructed to alter records. Bennett, perhaps feeling guilty about his passive role in the situation, provided copies of the original will and trust documents, along with notes from his conversations with Dad about his explicit intentions for the technology division. Your father was very clear, Bennett admitted. He wanted you to have full control of what you built. I should have been more proactive when I saw the first signs of interference. With each piece of evidence, we gathered my resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about money or business assets, it was about honoring my father's legacy and refusing to be erased from my own family narrative. The most surprising ally emerged when Walter introduced me to James Westlake, the developer whose contract had mysteriously changed hands. They told me you'd stepped away from the business due to grief, Westlake explained over coffee. Said you'd authorized them to redirect the project funds to the general operating account. I had doubts Howard always spoke so highly of your contribution, but they had documentation. Forged documentation, I clarified. So, I gathered he nodded grimly. I'm prepared to testify about our original agreement with you, and how it was altered without proper consultation. 2 days before our filing deadline, Morris received a call from Rachel's attorney, suggesting preliminary discussions to avoid unnecessary litigation. We declined, recognizing it as a delaying tactic. On a rainy Tuesday morning, we filed a comprehensive lawsuit against Rachel Dominic and Reynolds Enterprises, with Mom named as a co-defendant for her role in enabling the fraud. By afternoon, local business publications had picked up the story, Family War Erupts over Reynolds' construction empire. Rachel's response was swift and predictable, a press statement portraying herself as the victim of a vindictive brother, unable to accept her leadership. Mom gave a tearful interview describing her heartbreak over Miles's declining mental state and how the family had tried everything to help him. What they hadn't anticipated was the evidence being so overwhelming and public. The court granted our request for an emergency injunction freezing company assets, pending investigation. Within days, a court-appointed auditor began reviewing the financial records, and the preliminary findings supported our claims of systematic fraud. As public opinion began shifting, Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, without Dominic, for the first time in months. This has gone too far, she said, her previous confidence notably absent. We need to talk about a settlement. I'm not interested in settlements, I told her. I want what Dad intended me to have, and I want accountability for what you've done. Be reasonable, Miles. This public spectacle isn't helping anyone. Think about the family reputation. You should have considered that before you started forging documents. Her expression hardened. Fine. But you should know Dominic has contacts who can make problems disappear and appear. Think about that before you continue this crusade. The thinly veiled threat only strengthened my resolve. I reported it to Morris, who added intimidation to our growing list of complaints. The first court appearance brought a surprise. Mom attended, without Rachel sitting stiffly in the back row as our evidence was presented. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened carefully to our initial arguments before granting a temporary restraining order preventing any further transfer of company assets. The court finds sufficient evidence of potential impropriety to warrant caution, she stated, fixing Rachel's attorney with a stern look. No further disposition of assets until ownership is clearly established. As the case proceeded, more evidence emerged. Former employees came forward with stories of being instructed to alter records. Financial audits revealed substantial sums transferred to accounts connected to Dominic. The digital forensics team recovered deleted emails discussing how to handle Miles and create a paper trail. Most damaging was the recovery of security footage showing Dominic entering my apartment building on the day of the break-in using what appeared to be a key. The case gained momentum, attracting attention from larger business publications that framed it as a cautionary tale about family business succession. Legal experts interviewed about the case generally expressed shock at the brazenness of the fraud. Rachel, increasingly isolated as evidence mounted, attempted a desperate settlement offer, returning partial control of the technology division in exchange for dropping all criminal implications. Morris advised against it. "They're running scared," he observed. "The evidence is too strong for a partial victory." The turning point came unexpectedly when Mom requested a private meeting without attorneys present. Against Morris's advice, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a quiet tea room downtown. She looked older than I, remembered the strain of recent months evident in new lines around her eyes. For several minutes, she stirred her tea in silence before finally speaking. "I didn't know the extent of it," she said quietly. "About the forged documents, the diverted funds. Rachel told me you had verbally agreed to consolidation, but were being difficult about the paperwork. And you believe that, despite knowing me my entire life?" She met my eyes briefly before looking away. I wanted to believe it. It was easier than accepting the alternative. Which was that my daughter was capable of this level of deception. She set her spoon down carefully. "The forensic accountant showed me the evidence yesterday. The systematic transfers, the shell companies. Dominic's involvement in similar situations before. All things I tried to tell you months ago." She nodded, looking genuinely pained. "I failed you, Miles. I've been failing you for a long time in ways I'm only beginning to understand." The admission was unexpected, and I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to demand she explain years of favoritism culminating in this betrayal. Another part recognized the courage it took to acknowledge her role, however belatedly. "Why now?" I asked finally. "What changed?" "Rachel is leaving," she said, her voice catching. When the court froze, the assets Dominic started pulling away. Yesterday she told me they're moving to Arizona, that this hostile environment isn't good for the baby. But she let something slip about accounts in the Caymans. The realization seemed to physically pain her. They've been planning their exit all along, haven't they? This was never about the family business. It was about extracting as much value as possible before disappearing. For the first time I felt a flicker of sympathy for my mother. She had been manipulated too, albeit as a willing participant blinded by favoritism. "What will you do?" I asked. "Testify," she said simply. "Tell the truth about what I knew and when. It won't undo the damage, but it's the only way forward with any integrity." Her testimony proved devastating to Rachel's case. The mother who had enabled and defended her daughter now methodically detailed her own role in the fraud, including the critical admission that she had known the signatures were forged. With Mom's cooperation and the mounting evidence, the court ruled decisively in our favor. The technology division was legally restored to my ownership, with substantial damages assessed against Rachel and Dominic personally. Most satisfying was the judge's closing statement. "This court finds the defendant's actions represent a clear and calculated attempt to defraud both the plaintiff and the explicit intentions of Howard Reynolds. The systematic nature of this fraud suggests potential criminal liability, which this court refers to the district attorney for consideration." As news of the ruling spread, Rachel and Dominic's carefully constructed world collapsed. Business associates distanced themselves, social invitations dried up, and the pregnancy that had been weaponized as a shield suddenly became a reason for their hasty departure from the state. Walter called the day after the ruling. "Dominic cleared out his office last night. Word is, they're headed to Arizona or maybe Nevada. And the company, in limbo. Rachel hasn't officially resigned, but she hasn't been in for days. The board is considering emergency measures." The victory felt hollow in some ways. I had won back what was rightfully mine, but at the cost of relationships I had once valued. Yet, beneath the grief was a growing sense of liberation, freedom from toxic dynamics that had shaped my life for too long. As Rachel and Dominic retreated from the battlefield they had created, I stepped forward into a new chapter 1, where I would define my own place in the family legacy, with or without their participation. The final court order arrived 6 months after we filed the initial lawsuit. Its language was clear and comprehensive. Full restoration of the technology division to my ownership, damages totaling nearly $3 million to be paid, by Rachel and Dominic personally, and a referral to the district attorney for consideration of criminal charges related to the forgery and fraud. Rachel and Dominic had indeed fled to Arizona, leaving behind a trail of financial and emotional wreckage. The pregnancy, that had been wielded as both shield and weapon, resulted in a nephew I had yet to meet. According to Mom, they had purchased a house in Scottsdale under an LLC, apparently using funds transferred before the asset freeze took effect. The criminal investigation was ongoing with Dominic as the primary focus. His history of similar schemes had emerged during discovery 3 previous instances of insinuating himself into family businesses during transition periods, extracting value and moving on. Rachel's role was more complex, both perpetrator and in some ways victim of his manipulations. With the legal battle largely resolved, I faced the more difficult task of rebuilding not just the business, but my sense of family and belonging. The technology division had suffered during the conflict. Key employees had left, client relationships had frayed, and the innovation pipeline had stagnated. With Walter's help, I began the painstaking process of restoration, rehiring where possible, and recruiting new talent where necessary. "Your father would be proud," Walter told me as we reviewed the rebuilding plan. "Not just of winning back what's yours, but of how you've handled yourself through all this." Mom's attempt at reconciliation began with a small potted plant delivered to my office, the same variety of fern Dad had kept on his desk for years. The attached note was simple: "I'm sorry. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." For weeks, I left the gesture unanswered, focusing instead on therapy with Dr. Parker, who helped me process the complex emotions surrounding potential reconciliation. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or removing boundaries," she reminded me. "It means freeing yourself from the corrosive effects of holding on to anger." Eventually, I agreed to meet Mom for lunch at a neutral restaurant. The conversation was awkward, halting, filled with long silences and careful phrasing. "I've been seeing someone," she admitted, meaning a therapist. "Trying to understand how I became someone who could participate in hurting my own son." "And have you understood it?" She looked down at her barely touched salad. "I'm beginning to. Your father and I. Our marriage had complications I never shared with you children. Ways I felt overlooked or undervalued. Somehow, over the years, I began seeing you as an extension of him rather than as your own person. It wasn't a complete explanation or excuse, but it was a start, an acknowledgement of the dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. I don't expect immediate forgiveness," she continued, "or perhaps any forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm trying to change to see more clearly." We established a cautious new relationship coffee every other week, careful conversations about neutral topics, slowly expanding to include more personal subjects. There were setbacks and difficult moments, but also surprising instances of connection I hadn't thought possible. The relationship with Rachel remained fractured. She reached out only once with a text message after the birth of her son. "His name is Howard. I thought you should know." I sent a card and gift, but received no acknowledgement. Through therapy and reflection, I came to understand that while the inheritance battle had appeared to be about money and business assets, it had really been about validation, recognition, and a desperate attempt to rewrite family narratives. Rachel had spent her life believing she was secondary in Dad's affections, just as I had felt secondary in Mom's. Our parallel but opposite experiences had collided catastrophically in the vacuum left by his death. In the midst of rebuilding my professional life, I found unexpected personal joy. Haley had stood by me through the darkest period, offering support without enabling self-pity, challenging me when I needed challenging, and providing refuge when the battle became overwhelming. On a crisp fall evening 1 year after the court ruling, I proposed to her with my grandmother's ring recovered, along with other family heirlooms as part of the settlement. We married 6 months later, in a small ceremony, where Mom sat in the front row, and Rachel's absence was a palpable reminder of ongoing wounds. The business flourished under renewed leadership. Walter and I restructured the technology division as a separate entity with its own board and mission focused on the innovative solutions Dad had always envisioned. We established a scholarship fund in his name for students pursuing construction technology careers, creating a legacy that honored his vision while looking toward the future. Mom gradually earned back limited trust through consistent effort and genuine change. She joined a grief support group that helped her process not only Dad's death, but the loss of her relationship with Rachel. Our conversations became more honest, sometimes painfully so, but always oriented toward healing rather than blame. "I miss so much of who you really are," she told me. During one particularly emotional lunch, I was so busy seeing what I wanted or expected to see. We both missed things I acknowledged. Dad wasn't perfect either. None of us were. The criminal investigation eventually resulted in charges against Dominic for fraud and forgery, while Rachel received immunity in exchange for testimony. According to Mom's limited updates, their relationship had deteriorated under the strain, with Dominic moving out shortly after the charges were filed. 2 years after the court victory, I received an unexpected email from Rachel. "I'm in town next week. Howard is 3 now. He should know his uncle. If you're willing." The meeting was awkward, tense, but also strangely hopeful. My nephew had Dad's eyes and Rachel's smile, innocent of the conflict that had preceded his birth. Rachel herself seemed changed, less polished, more authentic, carrying both visible regret and tentative hope. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said, as Howard played with toys I'd brought. "Just a chance to build something new for his sake, if nothing else." It was a beginning not of restored trust or forgotten betrayal, but of a careful, boundary-respecting relationship that acknowledged both the painful past and the possibility of a different future. Through it all, I carried the most important lesson from the ordeal. True rehabilitation hadn't come from surrendering to others' demands or sacrificing my self-respect. It had come from standing firm in my worth, honoring my father's intentions, and refusing to participate in my own erasure. The military-style rehabilitation Mom had once threatened would have reinforced the very dynamics that needed breaking submission to inappropriate authority, denial of valid perspectives, acceptance of mistreatment as deserved. The real rehabilitation had been claiming my rightful place, setting healthy boundaries, and building a life defined by integrity rather than others' expectations. As Haley and I began discussing starting our own family, I found myself reflecting on the cycle of inheritance, not just of assets and businesses, but of patterns, perspectives, and emotional legacies. The greatest inheritance from my father wasn't the technology division or financial security, but the example of principled determination and the courage to stand up for what was right, even when standing alone. That was the legacy I intended to pass, on one of authenticity, integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing your own worth. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to take advantage of you? What boundaries did you set, and how did it change your relationships? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more supportive than the one we're born into. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to always stand up for yourself even when it's difficult.